Hello everybody, this is Hammer Striker here. Got a couple interesting pistols on the table. They're Walther PPK S's, and chances are pretty good you recognize this gun. If you've seen a Bond movie, you've seen this gun. The appearance in the Bond movies actually made them quite popular. They were popular over in Europe previously in the form of the PP and the PPK. The PP was the police pistol, the PPK came along, which was more of a smaller version for detectives. And then the PPKS was developed to circumvent some United States import restrictions. They get involved with size, caliber, and weight. So they add a little bit of size, added a little bit of weight, to get past those restrictions. But if you really, where you'd recognize this gun and what drove, especially in the United States, its popularity, is the whole spy thing. So you'd see Q give a Walther PPK, typically in .32, to James Bond. They were found in .22, .25, .32, .380, and something called 9x18 Ultra, which is kind of a predecessor to 9x19. And it's not compatible with 9x18 Makarov, so it's kind of a confusing little caliber. I don't imagine it was very popular. But you'd see Bond go out in his DB9 with his Q, the Q had given him a PPKS, or PPK actually, and you might expect something like this little .22, another spy-ish little thing that Q might have handed him. Now, I didn't actually see these in any of the Bond movies, but these are perfect for a spy movie, a little credit card gun. You've seen the video on this previously. So it's the whole spy theme that really made these popular, and you would typically see him with a shoulder holster. So he'd slide one of these things into a shoulder holster, carry it under his well-tailored suit, and go after the bad guys with a vengeance. So, let me take these things, pick them up. We'll do of course, the standard show clear. We have an empty .32. And we have an empty .380. Now, throughout this video, these things look nearly identical other than the beaver tail. There's a good possibility I'm going to point to the wrong one at the wrong time. But what I want to look at on these, get rid of these things, get them out of the way, is when the PPK first came out to get past the import restrictions, Inner Arms was bringing them in. And this one here, which is the .380, is an Inner Arms gun. So they were imported by Inner Arms, sold on the U.S. market legally, because of the added weight and size. And that went on from about up through '99. Now, this particular Inner Arms one was actually made in the United States. The Inner Arms did begin manufacturing them here. They had a facility and they manufactured in the United States. And then that went on through about '99. Then from about '02 to '13, Smith & Wesson was manufacturing them in the United States. And this .32 was a Smith & Wesson gun. You'll notice a couple minor differences. See the beaver tails? It's a much shorter beaver tail on the Inner Arms gun than the Smith & Wesson. And when I put it in my hand and I get a grip on it, you'll see that the beaver tail protects me significantly more than this one. So if you get really large hands and you get an Inner Arms gun, you've got a higher possibility of getting a slide bite than if you've got one of the Smith & Wesson guns. The current production that Walther's doing now is starting in about 18. They're making them in the United States under the Walther name. They're using the Smith & Wesson variant of the frame, and it'll have the more extended beaver tail. They're actually very nice looking guns. Turn them over so you can see the other side. They're very simple guns, almost plain. There's really not much going on. You've got removable grip panels. You've got rear serrations. There are no front serrations or rails or anything like that. And then the other side, you've got the mag releases and of course the other grip panel. On the top of them, they do have a little bit of texturing to cut down glare. And you can see it different. You can also see the finish is a little different on the two guns. The Smith & Wesson gun's a little bit more matte finish, but both of them have this little bit of serration almost to cut down glare when you're trying to use the sights. So let's go ahead and look at the sights. The sights on both of them were about the same, and they're really not that great. They're not hideous like some of these guns, these small guns, but they're a little bit harder to see. You've got silver at the back, silver at the front, a little kind of a lollipop sight, so you got a front dot and a rear red dot. the front and rear sight, when you're lined up on the range, they tend to blend. So it does make it a little more difficult to figure out where you're hitting. The gun is capable of good groups. It's just a little harder to do it with these sights, to be able to see the sights well enough to pull any kind of a really good group with it. I had to work with it a little bit to kind of get good at it. Despite the sights, they were actually quite fun to shoot, and once you could figure out how to lay out the sights, you could shoot them well. The 380 is a bit snappy, even with the weight that it's got. The 32 is just a pleasure to shoot. There's almost no discernible recoil whatsoever. So I'm going to pick just one of them. The safety features are identical on the two of them. There's a loaded chamber indicator right here that will protrude a little bit further when there's a round in the chamber. And you can see right there, part of the safety mechanism, that is the actual live fire pin. So it's not a transfer pin. And when you go to put the safety on, I'm going to hold the hammer back while I do this, you'll see that it rotates up, and now what's happening is that piece that's exposed to the hammer now is flush with the pin. So when the hammer's going to hit that, it's actually a hair further out than the firing pin. So when the hammer comes forward, it can't hit the firing pin. You'll also notice that when I put the safety on, it decocked it. Of course, you may not have really seen that clearly because I was holding the hammer, but the safety is also a decocker. And when you put it back into the fire position, you'll notice that the trigger moves. So I had the trigger back. The trigger was back because it's a double action, single action. It's around 13 pounds for double action, around 6 pounds for single. So, like typical of any double action, single action, the trigger pulls back in single action mode. When you decock it, which can be a little difficult to do, this one here is temperamental, the trigger stays back and the trigger is non-operational. Turn the safety off, the trigger goes forward. If I put the safety back on, the trigger is still non-operational. So these are designed to be drop safe, and they're designed to be carried with a round in the chamber, hammer down, safety on. That's how they're designed to be carried. Now keep in mind that with the safety off, there is a hammer block mechanism, but with the safety off, the hammer and the firing pin can contact each other. And there is an issue with some of the Smith & Wesson ones. The one that we've got, this 32, is subject to the recall, where that hammer block mechanism had a defect and could fail. So if you were carrying it like you see it right here with the safety off and around in the chamber, not only do you have a light trigger, but you also have the hammer block may fail. So cocked and locked is how they're designed to be carried. Decocked, safety on, round in the chamber is how they're designed to be carried. And carried in that manner, they are as designed a safe gun. And one thing that I haven't mentioned yet, well, actually two things. Capacity. The 380 holds 7 rounds. The 32 holds 8 rounds. The PPK itself typically holds 1 round less. So when they made it longer and heavier, they also added the capacity for 1 more round. And they're all blowback guns. So of course they're going to have a little bit heavier slides and a little heavier springs to function in that blowback mode. We did have a little bit of trouble with both of these, kind of being a little temperamental. Some of that I think is because they're older used guns. These aren't new guns. And I've got some spring kits on the way. I'm going to replace all the springs. This one here, the 380, the safety kept turning on. So you'd be firing along and all of a sudden you'd dead trigger and you'd find that the safety turned itself on. That's a known issue when the spring gets weak because the safety detent and the extractor share a spring. And on the 32 we had some fail to ejects and some fail to extracts. So again, I think we have some older guns. These things have been around for quite a while. The 32 did seem to get a lot of loving at the range by its prior owner, so the springs are worn out of use. The 380 that we've got appeared to be unfired other than the factory test fire. We couldn't really find any evidence that this gun had been noticeably fired, but this one has to be prior to 99 to be an interarms gun. So it's a 20, 30-year-old gun, and the springs are just aged out. So I got some spring kits on the way. With the springs in good condition, these have been known to be reliable. You want to stay within the standard ranges of the various ammos, because with blowback it's not as tolerant of weak ammo or overly strong ammo. So once we get the spring kit in, we'll put in an update on the reliability of these. And I, of course, would expect the modern ones, the new production ones, to be as reliable themselves as well. We can get into a few differences you're going to find between these that are generational. you notice the triggers are a little different. So I have the 380 in my hand. That's the inner arms gun. It's got kind of a serrated trigger, and when you look at the Smith & Wesson, it's got a smooth trigger. And there were a few other minor differences, like the beaver tails, the slide top finishes. You can see the difference in the shading and the sheen. None of these are significant differences. They're the type of differences you almost see even when it's all the same manufacturer, just year over year, and they just kind of tweak and tune things. There is parts interchangeability between the various versions of them as far as the main functional parts. Now the springs are different between the 32 and 380, but other than that, they aren't completely manufactured to different specs. They are manufactured to the same specs, and it's mostly cosmetic features that are different, shape of the trigger and stuff like that. Takedown procedure on these is the same for either one of them, so I'm just going to pick one and take it apart and show you how it works. So first thing you want to do is you want to turn the safety off, because you don't want the gun decocking itself when you're pulling it apart and having the hammer slide up against the frame components. You pull the trigger guard down and set it on the frame. And this is twitchy. If you bump it, it'll pop back in there. So you may have to kind of play with it a little bit to get it just right. But once you've done that, you grab it, pull the slide all the way back, lift it up, and forward. Now at this point you can release this so that it doesn't slam back, and you'll deal with it later when you go to take it apart. But now I've got the frame with a fixed barrel. Now the barrel is pinned on some of the older ones. The newer ones are going to be all one piece. And here's the recoil spring. It's fairly simple fire control group. There's not a lot going on in there. And this little spring is part of, or this little arm is part of the slide stop. There is no slide release. And when you go to take one of these apart, this thing likes to fall off and drop, and there's a little spring right here that'll go off flying. So you'll find yourself, while you're working with the gun, cleaning it and stuff like that, holding it with one finger here to keep that in place, or just take it off at the beginning so that you can keep track of that little spring. If you lose that little spring, it's not, of course, not going to work. And then in the slide is also relatively simple. You got the firing pin channel and the firing pin. This whole arm here, this whole rotating assembly, is the decocker safety mechanism. And take a look at there, you can see the breech face. And right up at the top is the combination it's the ejector and the loaded chamber indicator. Feed ramp on this is semi-polished, and it's two-piece. And again, there'll be one piece on the modern production, but you'll see that there's a piece that's in what would effectively be the frame, and then there's a piece that's kind of a round, kind of a 1911-ish design of the barrel. Go ahead and show you the rifling. These are conventional rifling. Standard landing groove. Everything on these guns, whether they're an inner arms gun, one of the ones that was manufactured here or imported, or the Smith & Wesson, they're very well machined. And of course, another thing, if you've seen a Bonds movie, you recognize this view from the intro. That intro of the Bond movies is actually looking down the barrel of a gun. I think it was a 357. I can't be 100% sure on that. It wasn't one of these. But that's a common view for pretty much looking at the beginning of any of the James Bond movies. Reassembly on this is not difficult, it's just a little twitchy. One of the things you need to make sure of is that when you do the spring, on this one, the 380, the spring is flat. It's flat all the way around. On the 32, the spring is cut, so it doesn't loop back around and make for basically a flat surface. You want to make sure that the spring doesn't protrude through here, and if it does, you'll find that you can't get the barrel to go through. Other than that, if you did release this, pull it back up, line it up, make sure that the spring is not sticking through, pull it back, all the way back, and then down, and then release, and you're back in business. So they're easy to maintain. A lot of blowback guns can be twitchy, with pins and tools and other weird things. This is among the easiest of the blowback guns to take apart. This little thing here can be kind of twitchy, but not bad. And there's nothing that you have to remember to keep with you, or you'll lose it, because you can take the gun apart, put it back together, just like it sits. It's also very easy to clean. Of course, when you saw I had it apart, the barrel stuck way up above the frame, so it's really easy to get your cleaning rod through there, and they're just easy to take care of, easy to work with. And now I'm not sure why some of the newer blowback guns are a little bit weird. And of course, you have the mag release here, and it is not reversible. For the magazines that come with this, one note is you can get them with a flat base plate. Now, these were used guns. I didn't know what magazine they actually came with originally. And you can get them with a pinky extender, and they're the same capacity. The pinky extender doesn't add any capacity to the magazine. And when you put the gun in, put the magazine in, it kind of gives you a nice 3-finger grip, and it does blend in well, and the curvature is nice. So I'm not a big fan of pinky extenders, but this one didn't cause me any difficulty or anything else. The only note from a range perspective, if you're trying to choose between these, 380 is a much more easily available round than 32. 380 is more effective, but this one will smack you around a little bit in 380. It has a tendency to kind of give you a little bit of a beating in here. You'd figure that being the weight of it, it wouldn't be snappy at all, but for some reason it is just a little bit snappy, and it is kind of a little bit rough on the web of your hand. The 32, you're going to find the ammo is going to be a little more expensive and harder to find, but it's much easier to shoot. It doesn't smack you around at all, and this being the Smith & Wesson version with the extended beaver tail, there's zero chance it'll bite you. So, it's kind of a catch-22 which way you want to go with it, a little more expensive ammo or a little bit more comfortable recoil. Either one would be effective for just a fun day at the range, whether you're doing a range at home or whether you're flying across the Riviera chasing some bad guy in his white cat. Either one of them is just kind of fun to have, kind of fun to shoot, and they're so recognizable. When people see them, they know exactly what they are. Beyond that, if you like our videos, please give us a thumbs up, share, subscribe, click that bell if you do, so you get notified when we publish a new video. And thank you again for our YouTube subscribers and our Patreon subscribers for supporting us, and have a great day. Thank you.